March 9, 1945. Mariana Islands, Pacific Ocean. The sun sinks toward the horizon over the vast American airfields on Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. In the fading orange light, the ground crews move with the urgency of men who know history is about to pivot. Across runways carved from recently captured Japanese territory, they perform final checks on an armada of 325 Boeing B-29 Superfortress bombers, the largest, most destructive air fleet ever assembled over the Pacific. Tonight, Major General Curtis LeMay, commanding the 21st Bomber Command, has initiated the most radical and controversial shift in bombing tactics of the Pacific War. His crews load bomb bays beyond standard limits, packing each aircraft with clusters of M69 incendiary bomblets, 1,520 per bomber. Each bomblet contains thickened gasoline, napalm that burns at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to turn entire neighborhoods into oceans of flame. The target is not a factory or a port. It is the heart of Tokyo's Shitamachi district, 750,000 civilians living in wooden homes crowded into just 12 square miles. It is the most densely populated urban area on Earth. And tonight, it will become the focus of the most destructive single air raid in human history. At 1735, the first silver-skinned B-29 thunders down Guam's North Field runway and lifts into the darkening sky. Behind it, the roar of Wright R-3350 engines echoes across the islands as bomber after bomber claws upward. There is no tight formation flying tonight. Instead, each aircraft flies alone, stripped of most defensive guns to make room for nearly double the standard incendiary load. Leading the attack are specially equipped Pathfinder aircraft. They will fly ahead, marking Tokyo with a blazing X easily visible from miles away. Behind them comes the main force, ordered to drop their incendiaries from a shockingly low altitude, just 5,000 to 7,000 feet, a fraction of the B-29's intended operational height. The goal is brutal efficiency, maximum accuracy, maximum ignition, maximum devastation. What is about to unfold will demonstrate the overwhelming force of American incendiary bombing and expose why Japan's air defenses, no matter their determination, were utterly unprepared for what was coming. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress had entered the Pacific theater as the most advanced aircraft of World War II, the culmination of over 1.4 million engineering man-hours and an unprecedented $3 billion development cost, surpassing even the Manhattan Project's $1.9 billion budget. It was a flying technological leap: pressurized crew compartments, remote-controlled gun turrets, analog computing gun sights, and the most powerful piston engines ever placed on an aircraft. Production stretched across the United States. Boeing built Superfortresses in Seattle, Renton, and Wichita. The Glenn L. Martin Company assembled them in Omaha. Bell Aircraft Corporation produced them in Marietta, Georgia. Each B-29 stretched 99 feet long, with a massive 141-foot wingspan, powered by four 2,200 horsepower Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines. Fully loaded, the aircraft could haul 20,000 pounds of bombs across a combat radius of 1,600 miles, reaching altitudes of nearly 32,000 feet and speeds of 357 miles per hour. By March 1945, roughly 2,000 B-29s had already reached combat units, with production accelerating toward the wartime total of 3,970 aircraft. American industry was operating at a level few nations in history could match. Boeing's Wichita plant alone rolled out more than 4 Superfortresses per working day. The 20th Air Force, commanded personally by General Henry Hap Arnold, had first deployed B-29s from China in June 1944. But after the capture of the Mariana Islands, the strategic picture changed. Starting November 17, 1944, the Superfortresses began launching directly from Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, placing Tokyo and the Japanese home islands squarely within their reach. Tonight, they would unleash a firestorm unlike anything the world had ever seen. The 21st Bomber Command controlled 3 major bombardment wings across the Mariana Islands. On Saipan, the 73rd Bombardment Wing and the 313th Bombardment Wing prepared their aircraft, while the 314th Bombardment Wing operated from Guam. Together, these units could launch more than 300 B-29 Superfortresses in a single mission, an airborne armada sustained by highly trained ground crews who worked non-stop to keep the massive bombers airworthy. Against this overwhelming force stood Japan's fragile and fragmented air defense network. By early 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy were operating under separate, uncoordinated command structures, each withholding information from the other. Communication was minimal. Coordination was nearly non-existent. Tokyo's defenses were built on a system that had never been designed to face hundreds of high-altitude, high-speed bombers appearing in the dead of night. Japan's primary night fighter, the Nakajima J-1N Gecko or Moonlight, was itself a symbol of desperation. Originally designed as a reconnaissance aircraft, it had been hastily modified for night interception. Armed with upward-firing twin 20mm Type 99 cannons angled 30 degrees and another pair firing downward, the Gecko could theoretically strike bombers from blind spots American crews struggled to spot. But theory was all Japan really had. Only 479 were built throughout the entire war, and many of those had already been lost in previous campaigns. The Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu, the Dragon Killer, served as another night fighter platform. It carried a 37mm cannon mounted in the nose along with oblique 20mm cannons. But Japan had produced only 171 of these aircraft since 1941, not nearly enough to defend multiple cities across the home islands. Even worse, Japan's night fighters lacked one critical technology: airborne radar. Without it, pilots had to rely on ground searchlights, moonlight, and pure luck to locate American bombers streaking through darkness at more than 300 miles per hour. Identifying, tracking, and intercepting a B-29 at night became a near impossible task. Ground-based defenses were no better prepared. Greater Tokyo, one of the world's largest metropolitan regions, was defended by fewer than 500 heavy anti-aircraft guns. The Type 99 88mm gun formed the backbone of high-altitude defense, while the Type 98 20mm cannon provided close-range protection, though with a maximum effective ceiling of just 11,500 feet. And Japan lacked radar-controlled fire direction systems entirely. Anti-aircraft crews depended on sound locators and optical rangefinders, tools that became useless in darkness, cloud cover, or poor weather. The numbers painted a stark picture. While the United States could launch hundreds of B-29s from the Marianas alone, Japan fielded perhaps 200 operational night fighters across the entire home islands by March 1945, and many of those sat grounded. Fuel shortages had become so severe that training flights were drastically reduced. New pilots entered combat with almost no night flying experience. Aviation gasoline was rationed to a degree that forced commanders to keep most aircraft parked, saving every drop for the anticipated final battle, the defense against an American invasion. Into this deteriorating defensive landscape stepped Major General Curtis LeMay. Taking command of the 21st Bomber Command in January 1945, he inherited a strategic bombing campaign that had failed to achieve decisive results. High-altitude precision bombing at 30,000 feet had proven almost useless. The powerful jet stream over Japan, often exceeding 200 miles per hour, scattered bomb loads miles off target, turning carefully planned attacks into guesswork. The challenges didn't end there. B-29 engines struggled when climbing to high altitude with full bomb loads. Their magnesium alloy components frequently overheated, causing fires or mechanical failure. And cloud cover hid Japanese cities from view more than 70% of the time, forcing crews to rely on early generation radar systems that were still primitive and inaccurate. By March 1945, something had to change, and LeMay was prepared to make decisions that would rewrite the strategy of the Pacific Air War. After reviewing every failure, every technical limitation, and every piece of intelligence available, Curtis LeMay made a decision that would permanently reshape the air war over Japan. What he proposed was nothing less than a complete reversal of American bombing doctrine, bold, controversial, and, in his view, the only logical path forward. LeMay ordered nearly all defensive guns removed from the B-29s, keeping only the tail guns. The freed weight allowed each bomber to carry a staggering 7 tons of incendiaries, double the usual 3.5-ton load of high explosives. Instead of climbing to high altitude, the Superfortresses would attack from just 5,000 to 9,000 feet. At these lower altitudes, The jet stream could no longer scatter their bomb loads, engines would run cooler, and accuracy would dramatically improve. The attack would come at night. In darkness, Japan's fighter force, already short on fuel, pilot training, and radar, would be nearly blind. Instead of flying in tight box formations, each B-29 would navigate individually using LORAN radio signals, arriving over Tokyo in a steady, continuous flow that would overwhelm defenses and saturate the target area over several hours. Meteorologists forecasted perfect conditions for the night of March 9th. Clear skies, low humidity, and strong surface winds that could turn thousands of small fires into a vast firestorm. Target selection made the mission's strategic intent unmistakable. American planners identified districts where cottage industries, family-run workshops hidden inside residential blocks, manufactured aircraft components, electrical parts, and precision instruments essential to Japan's war machine. OSS intelligence maps, combined with pre-war Japanese urban planning documents, allowed analysts to pinpoint the densest areas of industrial activity. The chosen zone lay in northeastern Tokyo, the wards of Asakusa, Honjo, and Fukagawa. These working-class districts were among the most crowded places on Earth. Extended families lived in tightly packed wooden homes separated by narrow lanes, conditions that made the region extremely vulnerable to fire. Here, Japan's industrial base and civilian population were intertwined so tightly that destroying one meant crippling the other. The weapon selected for the mission, the M69 Incendiary bomblet, represented the most scientifically refined fire-starting device ever produced. A hexagonal steel cylinder 3 inches wide and 20 inches long, weighing just 6 pounds, it delivered unparalleled destructive efficiency. Unlike older thermite or magnesium bombs that burned intensely but could be extinguished with effort, the M69 relied on napalm, a gelid gasoline created by Harvard chemists and Standard Oil engineers, designed to stick to any surface and burn at nearly 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Each E-46 cluster carried 38 M69 bomblets. At 2,000 feet the casing burst open, scattering them in a wide pattern. A fabric streamer oriented each bomblet downward, ensuring the fuse struck first. After a 3 to 5 second delay, a white phosphorus charge ignited and blasted flaming napalm across an area reaching up to 100 feet. The delay meant the bomblet had time to settle on its side, maximizing how far the burning gel could spread through wooden homes. Tests at the WWII Proving Ground in Utah had been chilling. Replica Japanese neighborhoods, complete with tatami mats, sliding doors, and wooden interiors, were consumed in minutes. Firefighters found the napalm impossible to suppress. Every M69 that landed created a new ignition point. Together, hundreds could merge into an uncontrollable firestorm. A single B-29 carried 40 of these cluster bombs, 1,520 incendiary bomblets. Of the 325 aircraft that took off on March 9th, 279 reached Tokyo. By the end of the night, Operation Meetinghouse would release roughly 424,000 M69 bomblets onto the city, an incendiary concentration unlike anything previously seen in modern warfare. American planners had calculated every variable, knowing that the dense clusters of wooden homes in northeastern Tokyo would turn the bombing into a self-sustaining inferno. Separate fires would merge, creating powerful updrafts and wind currents that carried flames far beyond the initial impact zones, making the destruction exponential. The first B-29 lifted off from Guam just after 5:30 p.m. on March 9th, piloted by Brigadier General Thomas Sarsfield Power, commander of the 314th Bombardment Wing. Over the next several hours, waves of bombers took off at 50-second intervals from 3 island bases, each aircraft carrying a payload capable of leveling entire city blocks. The 14-hour round trip would push both men and machines to the absolute limits of endurance. Crewmen wore lighter flight gear instead of bulky cold weather suits, taking advantage of the warmer temperatures at lower altitudes. With defensive guns, gunners, and ammunition removed, the B-29s climbed efficiently, conserving precious fuel over the 1,500-mile journey to Japan. As the bombers neared the Japanese coast, the snow-capped peak of Mount Fuji emerged on the horizon, serving as a dramatic and unmistakable navigation point. In Tokyo, air raid sirens wailed around 10:30 p.m., but most residents initially remained indoors. High-altitude raids in the past had caused limited damage, and a false sense of security persisted. Civil defense was woefully inadequate. Only 18 concrete shelters existed, capable of holding 90,000 people out of a population of 4.3 million. Most families relied on shallow bunkers, dugouts, or improvised trenches, offering almost no protection against incendiary bombs. Firefighting resources were similarly insufficient. Tokyo's 8,000 firefighters were equipped with hand pumps and bucket brigades designed for small-scale emergencies. Neighborhood associations organized civilian firefighting groups, mostly elderly residents, women, and teenagers, armed with sand buckets and water containers, utterly unprepared for the inferno that was about to descend. At 12:08 a.m. on March 10th, the first Pathfinder B-29s arrived over Tokyo, approaching from multiple directions to mark the designated target area. Flying at just 5,000 feet, they dropped M47 napalm bombs that ignited instantly, forming an enormous glowing X visible for miles. Minutes later, the main bomber force arrived, aiming for the illuminated markers with deadly precision. Weather played a critical role. Clear skies and steady surface winds between 17 and 28 miles per hour, with gusts reaching up to 45 miles per hour, helped spread the flames from one structure to the next. As M69 cluster bombs separated and descended, witnesses on the ground reported seeing them glinting in the firelight, a prelude to destruction. Within minutes, thousands of individual fires erupted across the target zone. Strong winds fused these separate blazes into a single, uncontrollable conflagration. Temperatures at street level soared above 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt glass and warp metal structures, turning the city into a roaring furnace of unimaginable scale. The superheated air generated by the fires created violent updrafts, whipping debris high into the sky. Streets became impassable as asphalt softened and ignited, while wooden homes and shops collapsed under the searing heat. The roar of the conflagration drowned out all other sounds, and dense smoke reduced visibility to just a few feet. Among those caught in the chaos was 24-year-old Yoshiko Hashimoto, at home in Tokyo's Sumida district with her 13-month-old baby. Her husband, an army officer, was on duty across the city. Later, Yoshiko would provide testimony that would help historians understand the human impact of the raid. The B-29s were dropping countless firebombs, and it sounded like the heaviest rain I had ever heard. I was astounded. I had never seen an air raid of such intensity. As the fires spread, Yoshiko fled alongside her parents, baby, and sisters, navigating streets choked with panicked residents. The narrow alleys of Shitamachi became death traps as thousands of people struggled to escape simultaneously. Families were torn apart in the confusion, while elderly residents who fell behind were unable to continue. Firefighting brigades, overwhelmed by the intense heat, abandoned their equipment and could not approach the flames. Reaching the Sumida River, Yoshiko witnessed scenes of unimaginable horror. Burning debris rained down around them, signboards, doors, household items, and warehouses along both riverbanks were engulfed in flames. Her father acted swiftly, plunging her and the baby into the river to escape the fire. The water saved their lives, but her mother, father, and sister perished in the inferno. Across the city, similarly devastating tragedies played out repeatedly. Those who sought safety in canals faced perilous conditions. The water was scalding, and the sheer number of people trying to reach it caused crushing chaos. The firestorm's winds were so powerful that survivors were carried long distances, sometimes ending up far from their original locations. Police stations, hospitals, and evacuation centers, places where civilians believed they could find safety, were encircled by fire. At Kikukawa Elementary School, a designated shelter, investigators later found only ashes and twisted metal where hundreds had sought refuge. Buddhist temples that had stood for centuries were destroyed along with those who had turned to them for sanctuary. Even those who survived outside the flames were not safe. The superheated air inflicted severe respiratory injuries within moments, leaving survivors struggling to breathe amidst the smoke and fire. Following the raid, casualty estimates varied, but the scale of death and destruction was unprecedented. The human toll was staggering, a stark reminder of the immense destructive power unleashed that night, and the vulnerability of civilians caught in the crossfire of strategic warfare. The devastation was staggering. According to the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, the attack claimed 87,793 lives and left 40,918 injured. Tokyo Metropolitan Police records reported 83,793 dead and 40,918 wounded, while the Tokyo Fire Department estimated as many as 97,000 fatalities and 125,000 injuries. Historical consensus now indicates that over 100,000 people perished in a single night, surpassing the immediate death toll from either of the atomic bombings. The physical destruction was equally catastrophic. Entire neighborhoods vanished as 267,171 buildings across 15.8 square miles were reduced to rubble. Roughly 1/4 of Tokyo's structures were obliterated, leaving over 1 million residents homeless. The city's industrial backbone, concentrated in small workshops interwoven with residential areas, was shattered. These facilities had produced essential war materials, and the destruction of both infrastructure and skilled laborers severely crippled Japanese production capabilities. American losses were comparatively minimal, yet still sobering. 14 B-29s failed to return, with 96 airmen listed as killed or missing. Some aircraft were tossed violently by the towering thermal updrafts generated by the fires below, losing control in moments of sheer turbulence. Others suffered anti-aircraft damage during their low-level bombing runs, though Japanese gunners struggled to track the bombers flying far below standard operational altitudes. Aircrews recalled seeing columns of smoke rising into the night sky from dozens of miles away, a terrifying confirmation of the fire's scale. Even those who had initially questioned General Curtis LeMay's radical tactics were silenced by the sheer impact of the raid. Reflecting on the operation, LeMay later admitted the moral weight. "I suppose if we had lost the war, I would have been tried as a war criminal." Yet his strategic brilliance was undeniable, and General Henry Arnold sent a message of congratulations. "This shows your crews have the guts for anything." The operation immediately reshaped American strategy. Within 10 days, similar raids struck Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe, hitting Japan's 4 largest cities in rapid succession. The campaign only paused when the 21st Bomber Command ran out of incendiary bombs, prompting an urgent increase in production. The disparity between American and Japanese capabilities had never been clearer. The United States could replace lost B-29s within weeks, while Japan could not rebuild its devastated urban centers or replace the thousands of skilled workers who had perished. American industrial output exceeded Japan's by a factor of 10, and while every B-29 and M-69 incendiary bomb represented a massive technological and financial investment, Japan simply lacked the resources to keep pace. By mid-1945, American factories were producing 50,000 tons of incendiary bombs each month. Meanwhile, Japan struggled even to maintain basic ammunition supplies. The Americans approached the campaign with a methodical, almost scientific precision. At the WWII Proving Ground in Utah, the Chemical Warfare Service had constructed detailed replicas of Tokyo neighborhoods using pre-war architectural plans, testing the M-69 incendiary bomblets on full-scale models to study fire behavior and refine bombing patterns. Every detail, every calculation, was designed to ensure maximum destruction. The contrast could not have been more stark. While Japan relied on outdated equipment, undertrained crews, and fragmented defenses, the United States combined overwhelming industrial capacity, innovative tactics, and meticulous preparation to devastating effect. Tokyo on March 10th was not merely a target, it was the ultimate demonstration of what modern strategic bombing could achieve, a calculated strike where planning, technology, and opportunity collided with tragic consequence. The creation of napalm was a product of meticulous scientific research and industrial ingenuity. The Standard Oil Development Company led the chemical development, while Harvard University and the University of Chicago contributed extensive analytical studies on fire propagation patterns. The result was a weapon designed with chilling precision, a gelled incendiary capable of igniting entire neighborhoods and resisting conventional firefighting efforts. This integration of science and military strategy stood in stark contrast to Japanese military doctrine, which emphasized tradition, honor, and valor over technological innovation or material efficiency, a gap that would prove catastrophic in the face of modern aerial warfare. Japan's failure to implement effective countermeasures revealed the limits of its strategic planning. Despite a preliminary raid on February 25 that destroyed 28,000 buildings, authorities made minimal improvements to fire defenses. Proposals to create fire breaks by demolishing select structures were ignored. Evacuation plans existed largely on paper, never drilled or enforced, while military authorities insisted civilians remain at their posts even as intelligence indicated massive incendiary raids were imminent. The chaos reflected deeper systemic issues: inter-service coordination failures, rigid hierarchy, and leadership unwilling, or unable, to adapt. Japan's night fighter forces highlighted the technological disparity. Pilots like Lieutenant Seiichiro Endo achieved remarkable individual feats, claiming 8 B-29 kills, but such successes were the exception, not the rule. Most night fighter pilots could not locate fast-moving bombers in darkness, especially once smoke from prior fires obscured visibility. Without airborne radar, pilots depended on ground-based controllers using acoustic detection, a method rendered useless by the roaring chaos of burning Tokyo. Even when they intercepted B-29s, their 20mm cannons rarely penetrated the robust construction of the Superfortress unless critical hits were scored on engines or fuel systems. Some desperate pilots resorted to ramming attacks, sacrificing their lives for a single bomber kill. Tokyo's fire department further exemplified Japan's infrastructural weaknesses. The city operated 286 fire engines, most of them manual pump units requiring teams of operators. Water pressure was insufficient for the scale of the attack, and damage to infrastructure during the raid disrupted supply lines. Standard procedures emphasized saving individual structures with traditional methods, a futile approach against tens of thousands of simultaneous ignition points. When the conflagration began, fire companies were quickly overwhelmed. Equipment was destroyed, personnel forced to retreat, and large sections of the city were left to burn unchecked. The psychological impact on civilians was profound and enduring. Many felt that centuries of traditional protection systems had failed entirely. Refugees fleeing the city carried first-hand accounts of horror, contradicting official reports that downplayed the severity of the attacks. Confidence in civil defense evaporated, attendance at factories declined sharply, and the term routine air raid entered common language as cities across Japan faced relentless bombardment. The raid on Tokyo was more than a tactical operation. It was a psychological weapon, shattering morale and demonstrating that modern warfare demanded far more than courage. It required adaptation, coordination, and technological supremacy. By August 1945, the landscape of urban Japan had been irrevocably altered. 66 cities had endured major incendiary attacks, leaving vast swaths of residential and industrial areas in ruins even before the atomic bombings began. The scale and efficiency of these operations profoundly shaped American military planning for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. Planners calculated that continued incendiary raids could eliminate nearly all remaining industrial capacity by October, potentially rendering a costly invasion unnecessary. Major General Curtis LeMay believed that strategic bombing alone might compel Japan to surrender. Joint Chiefs of Staff estimates reinforced this view, suggesting that conventional bombing campaigns had already caused roughly 900,000 civilian casualties and could claim millions more if the campaign persisted. These grim statistics influenced President Truman's decisions regarding atomic weapons. Far from being mere alternatives to conventional bombing, the bombs were increasingly viewed as instruments capable of delivering a decisive psychological shock to the Japanese leadership. The human dimension of these operations extended far beyond strategy or infrastructure. American aircrews carried a heavy psychological burden long after the missions ended. Richard Bale of the 9th Bombardment Group later recalled the night skies over Tokyo, ablaze with firestorms that stretched as far as the eye could see, a vision that haunted him for years. For Japanese survivors, the physical and emotional toll was staggering. Families endured irreplaceable losses that rippled through generations. The raids created countless widows and orphans, straining already fragile social support systems and compounding post-war recovery challenges. March 10th dawned to reveal an utterly transformed landscape. Eastern Tokyo, once a dense network of neighborhoods and workshops, had been reduced to ash and rubble. Only the sturdiest concrete and brick structures remained, standing like silent witnesses amid miles of flattened homes. Survivors struggled to navigate streets stripped of familiar landmarks, and recovery teams required heavy machinery to clear debris. Many victims could not be identified, and mass funerals continued for weeks. Even waterways were clogged with debris, hindering transportation and sanitation. The industrial consequences were equally severe. Tokyo's eastern districts had been home to thousands of small workshops where families produced precision components, electrical devices, and mechanical fittings, skills that could not be replaced quickly. The destruction of these facilities disrupted supply chains supporting larger factories, and the loss of experienced craftsmen, machinists, and technical specialists was irreplaceable. In surviving factories, productivity declined as workers struggled with personal losses, destroyed homes, and diminished morale. Once American forces replenished their incendiary supplies, the campaign resumed with renewed intensity. By May, raids incorporated refined techniques and lessons learned from earlier operations, achieving even greater efficiency and devastation. The methodical nature of the campaign demonstrated how industrial capacity, human endurance, and urban geography could be manipulated strategically to apply relentless pressure, ultimately shaping the final months of the Pacific War. By July 1945, the B-29s had begun distributing warning leaflets over Japanese cities ahead of each raid, a psychological tactic designed to demonstrate total American air superiority. These leaflets informed civilians of the next targeted city, signaling not only the reach of U.S. forces but also the inevitability of destruction. For American crews, these missions increasingly became routine. Some encountered minimal opposition, a stark contrast to the early days of the strategic bombing campaign. Japanese defensive capabilities were steadily deteriorating. Experienced pilots had been lost in previous engagements, ammunition stockpiles were critically low, and civil defense systems were collapsing under the weight of continuous attacks. The coordinated response required to protect urban areas had effectively disintegrated, leaving civilians largely helpless against the overwhelming power of the B-29s. The legality of targeting civilian areas remains a subject of intense historical debate. The 1907 Hague Convention addressed the bombardment of undefended cities, but applying these principles to modern urban warfare proved complex. Post-war tribunals prosecuted some Axis leaders for attacks on civilians, yet Allied operations, including the firebombing of Tokyo, were largely left unchallenged. These events set a precedent. Military necessity could justify collateral impacts on civilian populations, influencing later international humanitarian law even as precision weapons technology evolved. Weather played a critical role in amplifying the destruction. The March 9th to 10th raid, for example, was deliberately scheduled following a dry period and under meteorologically optimal conditions. Winds ranging from 17 to 45 miles per hour across the city, combined with low humidity and densely packed wooden structures, created a firestorm far exceeding what planners initially anticipated. Meteorologists had analyzed Japanese weather patterns extensively, demonstrating an unprecedented integration of environmental science with operational strategy. For individual B-29 crews, the mission was both awe-inspiring and psychologically harrowing. Smoke and heat from the firestorm could be detected even at operational altitudes. Pilots navigated through severe turbulence created by massive thermal updrafts, while gunners and bombardiers observed entire neighborhoods vanish in flames below. Some crew members struggled to reconcile their role in the devastation with personal values, requesting reassignment afterward. Others focused on the strategic objective, ending the war swiftly and minimizing further casualties on both sides. Japanese military responses highlighted severe limitations in command, control, and coordination. Anti-aircraft units fired continuously, yet achieved few hits due to darkness, smoke, and low visibility. Fighter squadrons scrambled 90 sorties but intercepted only scattered bombers. Fire department leadership had minimal warning and insufficient resources, prioritizing government and military facilities while residential neighborhoods were engulfed. Communications failed as infrastructure was destroyed, messengers could not traverse burning streets, and chaos reigned on the ground. Post-war memorialization of the Tokyo raids has been complex and evolving. Unlike Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which gained immediate global recognition, the firebombing of Tokyo remained relatively unknown outside Japan for decades. Survivors, determined to preserve their experiences, advocated tirelessly for recognition. Katsumoto Soto, a survivor himself, founded the Center for Tokyo Raids and War Damage to document first-hand accounts that might otherwise have been lost. These efforts reflect the ongoing struggle to honor civilian losses while situating them within the broader historical context of total war. For modern military strategists, Operation Meetinghouse offers enduring lessons. The raid demonstrated the sheer destructive capability of air power, yet also highlighted its limitations. Urban devastation alone does not compel immediate surrender. Japan continued to resist for 5 more months, illustrating that technical superiority can overcome geographic constraints but cannot entirely eliminate human resilience. Distinguishing between military and civilian targets in densely populated areas proves extraordinarily difficult, a challenge that persists in contemporary conflict. The evolution from precision bombing to area incendiary attacks underscores this point. Initially, the 21st Bomber Command followed established doctrines of high altitude, precision strikes, but repeated failures to achieve decisive results forced a tactical shift. LeMay's decision to employ mass incendiary raids was not the result of explicit policy but of operational pragmatism. The methodical application of area bombing, informed by weather, intelligence, and urban topography, demonstrated both the devastating potential and the moral complexity of total war. By March 1945, attacks on urban areas had become a grim routine, with target selection based less on specific military installations and more on population density and industrial distribution. Entire neighborhoods, filled with wooden homes and small workshops, were now considered strategic objectives. Survivor testimonies reveal the enduring human toll of these raids. Decades later, many still suffered persistent psychological trauma. Children torn from their families often never learned the fate of their parents or siblings. Yoshiko Hashimoto's account, preserved in historical archives, captures the horror of that night. The memory never leaves me. My mother, father, and sister died while my baby and I survived. I think about them every day. The social fabric of working-class Tokyo was permanently altered. Extended families were dispersed, centuries-old neighborhood networks vanished, and traditional businesses were erased overnight. Streets that had fostered generations of community life became charred ruins. The raids reshaped not only the physical landscape but the very structure of society. Evaluating Operation Meetinghouse also involves understanding its strategic impact. While historians debate whether strategic bombing alone could have forced Japan's surrender, the destruction undeniably accelerated the collapse of Japanese military resistance. Systematic devastation made continued resistance increasingly untenable. Emperor Hirohito later referenced the bombing campaigns and domestic turmoil as factors influencing Japan's surrender. The 100,000 lives lost in Tokyo contributed to ending a conflict that a ground invasion might have prolonged, potentially costing millions more. It is a grim calculation, providing little comfort to survivors, yet it shaped strategic decisions at the highest levels. Operation Meetinghouse illustrates the evolution of warfare from limited military engagements to total societal conflict. Residential areas, built over generations, were destroyed in hours by weapons manufactured thousands of miles away. The disparity between American B-29s delivering advanced incendiaries and Japanese defenders equipped with primitive firefighting tools highlighted the decisive role of industrial and technological superiority. There is a historical irony in how the raid has been remembered. The massive casualties and destruction of March 10th were overshadowed by the atomic bombings 5 months later. Yet in terms of immediate human cost and urban devastation, Operation Meetinghouse remains unparalleled. This overshadowing allowed conventional area effect weapons to develop further in subsequent conflicts, without the same scrutiny applied to nuclear arms. Statistics alone fail to capture the full scope of the tragedy. 325 B-29s launched, 279 reached the target. 1,665 tons of incendiary bombs fell on 15.8 square miles, destroying 267,171 buildings, killing over 100,000 people, and displacing more than 1 million. Behind each number were real lives: American aircrew executing orders thousands of miles from home, Japanese families engulfed in flames, children separated from parents, survivors confronting unimaginable loss. Operation Meetinghouse remains history's most destructive air raid, not merely as a military achievement, but as a sobering reminder of modern warfare's capacity for devastation. It demonstrates how strategic objectives can justify widespread civilian impact and how industrial-scale conflict can transform entire populations into involuntary participants in war. The night of March 10, 1945, serves as a stark testament to the human cost of total war, where technology, strategy, and ambition collide with ordinary lives in catastrophic ways.